Hi and welcome to the next revision podcast in AQA British History AS level. This is Unit 2, Social and Constitutional Reform. Okay, so the first part of this unit is pretty much what did the Liberals actually do when they got into government. And they're never going to ask you like what did they do, but you need to be able to give examples. So here are some examples. So you can pretty much split what the Liberals changed into sort of the groups of people that they were trying to help. So first we're going to go through what the Liberals did for children. So in 1906 you got the Free School Meals Act, which is pretty self-explanatory. This was obviously good because it helps kids to concentrate in schools, and it sort of means that fewer kids are starving, which is going to be a good thing, but it was only provisional. Like, the government told councils that they could give out free school meals if they wanted to. Not a lot of councils actually did it. In 1907, you've got the School Medical Inspections Act. This was compulsory, so basically every school had to inspect kids for medical problems, so that was a good thing. But a bad thing about it was that it didn't treat the kids, so you know, if you're a really poor person and your kid's been diagnosed with something at school, you probably don't have money to treat them because there's no NHS at this point. So it sort of identifies a problem, it doesn't solve a problem. Then in 1908, got the Children Act, which you probably need to know more about because that's a very general name. It basically makes parental neglect illegal, which, you know, seems kind of stupid. Seems like they should have made that illegal before, but that's a good thing. And that is a very sort of new liberalism idea. New liberalism talked about in the first video. But the government interfering within the home, like saying you can't neglect your children. I don't know, it sounds pretty basic, but that was quite a new idea. This act also introduced young offenders courts, so like Borstal and stuff, which is treating children differently to adults, which again is a new liberal idea. It made it illegal to sell children alcohol and tobacco, which is pretty good because it's keeping the kids safe. You could say as a bad thing about this act, if you had to think of a bad thing, that it's mainly changing and codifying, basically like rewriting old laws. It's not actually anything super new and revolutionary, but it was like new social ideas, so it's pretty good, that one. Then you've got what did the Liberals do for the elderly, and the main thing they did was 1908 pensions, so Old Age Pensioners Act. This is something we still have right now, and it's obviously quite a new idea of, you know, the state paying to help people. That's not a Victorian idea, that's definitely a new liberal thing. Bad things about this act, if you wanted to say them, it's not very much money. I think you had to be 70 to get it, and I think it's 60 that you're covered up to for national insurance, so there's a gap where you basically aren't getting anything. And sorry, in order to apply for a pension you had to be like of good character, and the government like assessed people as to like whether they deserved a pension. I think like the quote they give is like good character, so it's still sort of considered to be helping the undeserving poor, like people who are good and don't deserve to be poor, and it's not that much pension. I can't remember exactly how it was, I'll put it on the screen, but it wasn't that much, so it's still sort of a safety net, still like self-help. Then you've got the main group that the Liberals tried to help, which is workers. So in 1909, they set up trade boards, which was to check working conditions and ensure safety and fixed hours in the workplace. So they're kind of like trade unions, but not really. They're like government boards rather than unions, but they're still kind of bridging that gap. It means that employers can't just sort of do what they want and take advantage of the workers, which is good. But it doesn't help all workers because they can't check on like farmers and stuff like that. Also in 1909, got the labour exchanges. These are kind of like job centre. They're like the original job centre. So you just go to like a hall, I guess, and you've got employers there and people who need a job, and then you sort of try and mix the people so that more people can get jobs. By 1914, 2 million people had registered, so that's pretty good, and they are helping people to get jobs. That's a good thing. But only 1 in 4 people who would sort of go to these exchanges would actually get a job. So that's a bad thing if you need to say a bad thing about it. Then in 1911, you've got the big one. This is national insurance for the unemployed and for the sick. So it's not just workers, but mainly workers because it's about working. So it basically, employers contribute, workers contribute, and then the government contributes through taxes, which again is a very new liberal idea, the state paying to help people. Basically, if you were unemployed, they would give you money, it's like benefits. Or if you were sick and you couldn't work, they give you money, again, it's like benefits. Fewer people fell below the poverty line because of this. It stopped people falling below the poverty line when they were ill, and it covered the majority of workers, so it was, it was pretty good. But it's still based on ideas of self-help, so it's still kind of Victorian-ish. It doesn't cover the families of the workers, so if the worker is unemployed, they're giving money to them, so, they still don't have very much money. And it doesn't cover everyone, so nowadays we have insurance for everyone, it's just workers. And if you have seasonal employment, so if you were someone who only worked in the summer or whatever, you aren't covered by the scheme, so that's not so good. And then other legislation for workers, you've got the Merchant Shipping Act and the Coal Miners Act, which reduced the hours underground to 8, which sounds like a lot, but it was more than that before. The reforms in general were sort of based around this idea of self-help. So if you get a question that's was it a welfare state? No, but, it was part of the way there. Churchill called the reforms a lifebelt. Okay, the next half of this unit is pretty much the people's budget and the constitutional crisis that arose from that budget. So let's go through that. Why did the Liberals propose the people's budget? This could be an exam question, so why did they do it? They wanted to ensure that all Liberals were committed to change, because obviously a lot was changing and new liberalism is still quite a new idea, so they wanted to make the party nice and cohesive and make sure everyone in the party wanted to change things. The belief in new liberalism, so a lot of people in the party believe in new liberalism and they want to change things. They want the state to start funding these reforms. It's just what they believe in. It's sort of like revenge against the rich as well. The Liberals, a lot of their people who vote for them are workers who, they want to take money from the rich Conservatives and the Lords and all of those people, because they're people that are voting for them are poorer, and they're just fed up with the rich people having all the money and running the country, so they sort of wanted to get one over on them through this budget. So again, it's to anger the Lords as well, who had already rejected some Liberal bills. The Liberals felt that the House of Lords had too much power. Again, since the election result yesterday, or whenever it was, the 7th, probably want to, that's still relevant, Lords having a lot of power, and should we have Lords reform? So yeah, they wanted to anger the Lords and anger the rich people. It's also for political reasons, to show that they were doing something, to stop what's known as electoral rot, which is when your voters go off you, essentially, which is what happened to the Liberal Democrats on Thursday. People stop liking you. And also to sort of get one up on Labour, because Labour, again, going for the working class vote, trying to get, the working class vote, the promises of reforms, and the Liberals want to show that they can do that too, and that there's no need to sort of go to Labour because they're doing that. Then there's financial reasons. They want to prevent budget deficit. They're spending a lot on reforms, or they're planning to. So they need more money, and or they're going to be in debt, and they decide they're going to get this money off the rich people. Okay, so what was actually on the budget? Basically, they increased taxes on high incomes, and they put a super tax on incomes over £5,000, which then was a lot of money. So basically, they're putting more tax, making the rich people pay more tax. They also put tax on cars, according to the horsepower of the car, and they put a tax on petrol. So again, the people with cars and the people with petrol for their cars are rich people. And then they put death duties on valuable estates. So if someone died who owned a valuable estate, they have to give some money to the government. So obviously, the Conservatives in the Commons, who are traditionally rich people with estates, who own land or whatever, and their supporters are rich landowners as well, they don't really like this budget because it means they're going to be paying a lot more tax for things like pensions and national insurance, which they don't agree with, like, on a fundamental basis. They don't think that their money should be paying to help other people. They still think that, to be honest. And obviously the House of Lords, they're people appointed by birth, so they're also a lot of rich landowners, so they're not really happy about this budget either. But also they don't think that the Liberals sort of have the right to change things so much, so they don't like that either. So how did the People's Budget lead to constitutional crisis? Well, basically, in the British government, you've got the House of Commons, which at this point is a Liberal majority, but not a huge majority. And then you've got the House of Lords, which is mainly Conservatives. There'll be, one or two Liberals in there, but it's pretty much Conservatives. So what happens is the Liberals in the Commons vote through this budget, and then it goes on to the House of Lords, as happens with any bill in Parliament ever. And the Lords reject it. The Lords say, we're not going to pass this because you're using it to push through other reforms, which isn't, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they said. And, a lot of them don't like it anyway. So they send it back to Commons, saying, amend this, we're not going to pass it. And then the Liberals are, really annoyed, because the Lords aren't supposed to veto, it's called veto when they refuse to pass it. They're not supposed to veto budgets, so they don't think it's allowed, and they refuse to amend the bill, but the Lords refuse to pass it. So there's sort of like a stalemate. No one's going to do anything. Okay, so what actually goes down? Again, not going to get a question, what happened, give me a timeline, but kind of need to know it. So, November 1909, the House of Commons send the budget off, the Lords veto the budget, and say sort of reluctantly they will pass the budget if an election is won based on the budget. So there was just an election in 1906, they're going to have another one. In January 1910 they have this election. They fight it based on the budget, but the Liberals really pushed the issue of Lords reform in this election, which is stupid because now it's 100 years later and we still haven't had Lords reform. And their slogan is the peers versus the people, the peers being people in the House of Lords. The Liberals win the election, but they only have 2 seats over the Tories, so they have to form a government with a coalition, again, 100 years later, with the Irish Nationalists and Labour, so they're sort of relying on their support to form a government. April 1910, the Lords passed the budget. But the Liberals aren't satisfied with that. They're going to go a bit further with the peers versus the people thing. They proposed the Parliament Bill. What is the Parliament Bill? Basically, it's saying, what it says is, the Lords should have no power to veto money bills, which are basically budgets. The Lords should only be able to suspend bills for 2 years, not veto them entirely, so that's quite important. And that there should be elections every 5 years. And that's obviously what we have now, every 5 years. So, from June to November 1910, they're talking about it. The Lords not a fan of the Parliament Bill. They like having power. They like being able to veto things. They're not just going to chuck that away. The Conservatives in the House of Commons as well aren't a fan of that either, so they're trying to block it. The Liberals want the Parliament Bill, and they also want new Liberal peers in the House of Lords. So they go to the King, George V, which is a V, and they ask him to appoint new Liberal peers, and he doesn't really want to. He doesn't really want to change anything, to be honest. The Irish, who are now like the Irish Nationalist Party, who are now sort of in with the Liberals in a sort of coalition, they want this to go through because they want the Lords weakened, because the Lords don't like Home Rule, and the Irish Nationalists do like Home Rule. It's what they want, so they are really hoping to weaken the Lords. Okay, December 1910, there's another election. The Liberals and the Tories both get 272 seats each, so they are exactly the same. And the only reason that the Liberals can stay in power in government is by joining up with Labour and joining up with the Irish Nationalists, which they're not a fan of because, you know, joining up with parties just gets complicated, as we know, but they have to. Then, in May 1911, the House of Commons passed the Parliament Bill because there's a majority. If you add Liberals, Labour and Irish, they have a majority. In August, the Lords passed the Parliament Bill, which sounds surprising, but basically some of them are a little bit sick of this fighting and just think it'd be easier to cooperate. They think maybe, you know, it's not such an awful idea, and they're nicknamed the Rats, which is a bit harsh, but enough rats join the new Liberal Lords who were appointed after the December election, so that the bill is voted through in the House of Lords. Then in November of 1911, Balfour resigns because of the Conservatives not being happy about this bill and being divided over it. So, what was the impact of the constitutional crisis? So, for the Liberals, a good thing is that they now have Liberals in the House of Lords, so they can pass more bills through the House of Lords, so that's a good thing for them. They're going to get more done. But they have lost some support, obviously, because their number of seats has gone down in January and December, because they were seen as sort of not doing a lot. They were just seen as like mucking around with Lords reform and not actually helping the people who voted for them. And obviously they kind of were in the long term, but, you know, people went off them. And also, if you have 2 elections in a year, people are just going to get apathetic and, like, not really care anymore. Like, turnout got lower for the elections. I don't know the percentage, but fewer people turned out to vote because they couldn't be bothered. And also with the Liberals, they are now joined up with the Irish Nationalists and Labour. So they're, like, under pressure from them and attached to them, which is not good because parties want to be separate from other parties so they can have like individual beliefs and stuff. And now that they're joined with the Irish and Labour, they're gonna have to do something for them. Basically, that's the idea of the Irish. They're gonna get in with the Liberals because what they want is Home Rule, but they're not gonna get that if they're not a majority. So they're gonna pressure the Liberals for it in return for passing this budget. So obviously for the Liberals, that's not such a good thing. Impact for the Conservatives, there's only one good outcome for them really, is that the anti-Conservative vote is now really split between, well not really, more split between Liberal, Labour and Irish. So pretty much everyone who's like right-wing Conservative is voting for one party, everyone who's wanting reform and is more left-wing is now divided, so that's good for the Tories. But bad things for them, people now see them as being, you know, on the side of the peers, not the side of the people. They're seen as backing the Lords rather than the people. The party is divided because some of them were really against this Parliament Act, and obviously enough of the rats voted for it, so that's a really divided party. They lose Balfour. He resigns. You could say that was a good thing because he wasn't very good, to be honest. He's replaced by Andrew Bonar Law. They also have managed to anger the Irish nationalists because they've been supporting the Lords, and obviously that didn't seem like a big deal before, but now there's like 81 Irish nationalist MPs, and now, they're with the Liberals, so they are the opposition, and the Tories have managed to annoy them.